Good evening. Some of the worst storms since the 1987 hurricane have been battering southern Britain. Winds gusting well over 100 miles an hour have left hundreds of thousands of homes without power, blocked dozens of roads and caused widespread flooding. The storms hit the southwest coast first and have been moving across southern England and Wales. They're easing off tonight, but new gales are moving in from the northwest. Some of the worst flooding has been around Carmarthen, where the River Towy burst its banks. And 200 miles off the Cornish coast, 10 fishermen were rescued from a trawler adrift in mountainous seas.
Hurricane-force gales wreaked havoc around Britain's coastline and brought misery to thousands of people for a second day. For the emergency services, the mountainous seas proved daunting as RAF helicopters were scrambled in a race against time to rescue 9 Spaniards and 1 Irishman whose fishing trawler was in danger of sinking 200 miles off Cornwall. Tonight, those who helped coordinate the rescue said the men were lucky to survive such conditions.
Absolutely horrendous. 50-foot seas and 70-mile-an-hour winds combined to create some of the conditions that mariners say that they haven't seen for some time in that particular area.
At Selseybill in West Sussex tonight, the Environment Agency has teamed up with the local authority in a desperate struggle to make urgent repairs after the breaching of sea defences. It's led to some of the most serious flooding in recent years and left a caravan park almost totally immersed underwater. Caravans and mobile homes have been evacuated and people living on the peninsula have effectively been cut off. For the moment, there's little option but to pile up the sandbags until the storms die down.
We have really got to cross our fingers and see. We will rebuild the bank as best we can between the tides, but this weather is the strong winds are due to last until the next high tide. So it really is a matter of luck.
Conditions on roads throughout Britain were also treacherous. In Wombourne in Staffordshire tonight, 1 man died and a woman had to be cut free after a tree fell on their car. Motorists in Carmarthen in South Wales, where the River Towy burst its banks, were forced to abandon their cars. Businesses in the town were stunned by the scale of the flooding.
We only opened the shop 8 months ago, so this is a new business, new venture. And I've been told that the water comes up occasionally to the curb and over the top, but didn't expect this.
While much of the south and west of England prepared for massive clean-up operations, the government has said local authorities may be able to apply for financial help under a scheme which could cover up to 85% of uninsurable damage. Householders too are counting the cost, among them a pensioner from Cornwall whose property was almost wrecked by howling winds.
There was a loud, loud, loud bang, and that corner lifted off of the building. So I got out of bed and my feet never touched the floor till I was downstairs.
Once again, engineers were out in force, mostly in Cornwall and the Swansea area, trying to restore power to tens of thousands of homes whose electricity supplies were cut off. Ferry sailings were also hit, with 1 Stena Line service from Harwich arriving in Amsterdam to reveal serious damage caused by the pounding seas. France has suffered too, with serious storm damage to homes in the town of Rennes and a church in Brittany. But as is so often the case when the going gets tough, the challenge of taking on nature proves irresistible. John McIntyre, BBC News.
Israel's Foreign Secretary David Levy has resigned, leaving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a majority of only 1 in the Knesset. Mr. Levy pulled out of the coalition led by Mr. Netanyahu because of disagreements over social welfare payments and slow progress in talks with the Palestinians. From Jerusalem, Lise Doucette reports.
David Levy has taken Israel's government to the brink many times before. Most Israelis believed today would be no different. But Mr. Levy's patience has clearly run out. The foreign minister said it wasn't just the budget which forced him to quit. He'd lost faith in this government, including its commitment to the Middle East peace process. The Prime Minister came back fighting. In a televised address, Mr. Netanyahu defended his social policies, and he warned Israelis that only his coalition could achieve real peace with the Palestinians. But this right-wing government has now lost its most moderate member, and that sends a worrying signal to the Palestinians.
He is going to be even more dependent on the extreme right wing, which means the peace process once again will remain hostage to the entrenched ideological right-wing positions.
For now, Mr. Netanyahu needs to keep all his allies on board, lest his government fall. In the last 19 months, it's lurched from one crisis to the next. Mr. Netanyahu is a master of survival, but Mr. Levy's departure has left him far more vulnerable. There's growing speculation here about early elections. Israel looks set for another period of political turmoil, and that means an already beleaguered peace process will again be put on hold. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Girls are increasingly doing better at school than boys in their mid-teens. New research found that boys were underachieving in all but one English education authority. The school's minister, Stephen Byers, says schools need to recruit more male teachers to give boys a positive role model. Our education correspondent Mike Baker reports.
You may start, thank you.
These new figures confirm the recent trend of girls outperforming boys at every level, from primary school tests through to GCSEs and A-levels. In some areas, 15% more girls than boys are scoring 5 good GCSE passes. Some co-educational schools, like this one in Essex, have tried to tackle the issue by teaching girls and boys separately. Tomorrow, the government will demand action to close the gender gap, requiring local education authorities to draw up plans showing what they intend to do about it. With boys far more likely than girls to play truant, become unemployed or commit crimes, ministers want urgent action.
If we want to create a modern Britain and a decent society, then we do have to tackle the issue of a culture of anti-learning which exists amongst far too many boys at the present time. There's a sort of laddish culture which doesn't value education for itself. We've got to challenge that, and we've got to say that it's not acceptable that boys will be boys.
Right, let's start with a reminder.
Research has found that boys fall behind in reading very early, and this could be because most teaching is delivered by women, and this could affect boys' attitude to learning.
Most of their teachers are female. The classroom assistants, the parents who help in the classroom are nearly always mothers, and we've found that with 5 to 7 year olds, 3/4 of children are heard reading by their mother, but only a half by their father. If reading appears to be a purely female activity, then of course boys at that young age are going to see it as not something that boys and men do.
20 years ago, the concern was all about girls underperforming, particularly in science and maths. Positive action has changed that. Now ministers believe the focus must be on boys. Mike Baker, BBC News, at the Department for Education.
4 children from one family have died in a house fire in the Scottish seaside town of Nairn. The children, 3 boys and wants to find ways to help those at risk. The Home Office says 70 prisoners killed themselves in 1997, 6 more than the previous year. Ms Quinn has called a conference to come up with measures to stop prison suicides. Joe Campbell reports.
As Britain's prison population has risen remorselessly, so's the number of inmates who take their own lives. Last year it reached an all-time high of 70 suicides, something ministers accept can't go on.
We do have a duty to make sure, in accordance with the prison services motto, to look after prisoners with humanity, to make sure that we can have as effective anti-suicide policies as possible.
That's fine. You can take your time.
Measures like allowing prisoners access to the Samaritans have succeeded in lowering the proportion of inmates who attempt suicide. But campaign groups say that's been undermined by the pressure to jail more and more people.
There are people dying in prison who would still be alive if they'd been dealt with on community service or on probation, and they hadn't committed serious offences in the first place.
The prison service too has been asked to examine the problem. It's to review the way it assesses those who might be at risk of taking their own lives, and to study the design of cells in the hope of cutting the numbers who actually succeed. But all that will count for little, according to the critics, so long as the prison population continues to rise. Joe Campbell, BBC News.
Manchester United are the new favourites to win the FA Cup after